What can you expect for your business in 2025? Now, I know there's so much articles and all these things about what's trending and what to look out for, but what I wanted to bring you is some really real practical advice on the trends that are happening as seen from over a year of interviewing more than 30 different entrepreneurs around the world. So as part of this podcast, every single guest I'm getting an hour conversation with entrepreneurs at all levels, from those starting out to those who have been in business for years that are making multiple 7 and 8 figures. And I am giving you all the insights in this quick episode on what they see going forward. If you find any of these themes particularly interesting, it's worth going to those individual episodes to hear each of these entrepreneurs speak. But I'm going to really distill it down so you walk away with some clear, practical things that you can do for this year. We have narrowed it down into 10 different trends. And I'm probably going to have to divide this episode up into a few different sections because I want to make sure you get the most out of it. But I also recognize you don't have tons of time. So know that we might be dividing it up, but it will all be released together. So if you reach the end of part one, part two is right behind it. When we're talking about these 10 trends, I'm going to give them to you, give you examples, and also give you some reflective questions to help you plan for 2025. So maybe the first time you listen to this, you're doing something else, completely fine. But maybe you go back to the trends you really liked and you take some notes because it could really help you plan for your strategy and your marketing in this coming year. Trend number one, micro niche communities and a community centric business model. Now, I wanted to make these two separate trends, but they actually link together really, really closely. And what this means is that there is a huge shift happening in the world right now online from people who are having really transactional follower led marketing. So it was always before about how many followers do you have? What is your social media size? And that is really shifting now to who do you have in your community, and not just in your community, but also how specific are you in what you're offering? Now, I know people love to say like don't niche down, keep your world open, and I think that that's great in terms of personal advice. Don't always put yourself in a box. It's also great advice for your future. You don't always have to do the same thing. But when it comes to 2025, really getting the people that you want who are in a super saturated market and hearing so many messages, the more you can speak to them specifically, the more you are going to stand out. So I'm going to give you an example first of this community centric business model and then the micro niche community. So community centric business model would be something like, let's say you're a fitness entrepreneur and you've been doing one-off workout plans, or you've been doing even one-to-one training. If you then shift to a membership based online community, you are switching to a community centric business model. This basically takes you from selling to followers to nurturing relationships. It's a big shift here, and you are putting your energy into a loyal customer base that grows organically. So you have said, I'm not going to focus so much on this cold audience. I'm going to really invest my time and energy into these people who want to be part of my community. And one of the biggest things you can do in 2025 and going forward is get people who really care so much about what you're doing that they want to be a part of your community. When we talk about micro niche communities, that's about getting even more specific in what you offer. It doesn't mean it has to be the only thing you offer, but it is something that allows someone to say that is exactly me. An example would be this. Let's say that you are creating a female founders group. That's quite niche, right? Female founders. But what you would do to make that even more micro niche is you might say, for example, female founders in the health tech industry. That becomes even more micro niche for you. And what you can do if this sounds like it's pushing you a little bit too much in one direction and you want to expand and have lots of ideas, create an offer that is in this hyper niche. Create a distribution platform that is in this hyper niche, but you can do other things. So, for example, I have this podcast is very micro niche. It is for female business owners and creators in the first 3 years of their business or of a business pivot. It doesn't mean that I only work with those people, but this specific platform is for them. And it allows people to self identify a lot easier. This hyper specialization can really help you stand out. It doesn't mean that you only do one thing. It just means that in your messaging, you can really speak to one kind of person. How do I implement that? What does it look like? Well, what are specific workshops you could offer to these people, either paid or free? Or on demand? What are specific question and answer sessions you could offer to this audience? Could you create a private podcast for this group of people? Think about what is a way that you could really nurture this small community. Sometimes it's going to be very standard tools we already know about, like a newsletter, for example. And other times it's going to be a little bit more innovative, such as having a hybrid workshop model where maybe you also bring on a panel or you bring on someone to be on a hot seat. The amount of creativity you can have here is endless. People want more than just your offer. They want to feel like they are a part of something. And in some ways, that has always been the case. But as the noise online continues to grow, this becomes even more important. So now it's more like you're creating a community, which then informs or inspires the products that you create. This is how you refine and how you grow. And so this trend is all about that. This past year, 2024, I pivoted and I started doing more business mentorship and helping people launch podcasts and grow podcasts and get on podcasts as a way to nurture their business. My big strategy in doing that was to create a community around a totally new podcast. This one, her first 3 years. I didn't go in saying, I have the products for you already. I waited, I think it was 4 to 6 months before I even offered something. Now, I'm not saying you have to wait that long, but really think about when you're developing something, involving and building the community from the beginning. This is often the missing piece for anyone struggling with engagement or struggling with scaling. Thinking about these questions. Number one, who is your micro audience? Who is it? What specific problem are you solving or could you solve for them? As an example, with this podcast, when I think about entrepreneurs in the first 3 years of their journey or their pivot, a specific problem they have is getting very practical advice that is not filtered, that isn't polished, that's raw, that gives them a really real insight into what it's like and gives them that emotional support. So, what problem are you solving? Number two, when you're creating this community centric model, how can you add a feeling of belonging? Keep it very intimate. So there's a group of people that really feel like they know you, whether this is paid or unpaid, your choice. How could you do that? What could you do to make it feel like they really belong? Next question is, do you treat your audience, whether that's on social media, podcasts, or whatever, like followers or like an engaged community? And this is a tricky question because your community isn't necessarily just the people who pay. And so, are you really somehow bringing those people in and letting them feel seen? Or is it just really, trying to get more followers, more likes? Because that's going to change your marketing strategy quite a lot. Last question. What opportunities are you providing for your audience to engage directly with you and with each other? I love this question because I feel that a lot of times we feel like, oh, if we put out a post and we say we're on social media, people can just reach out, but they often don't. It requires you really extending that invite. So, are you saying in post, message me? Are you saying in podcast, I'm here? Are you saying you want to know on this survey? Are you really inviting people to have a voice with you? Because when it's a two directional conversation, you're much more likely to create a feeling of loyalness, of loyalty, and you grow a little bit stronger. So, questions to think about in the micro niche and in the community centric business model. Trend number two, we're going to be shifting to owned platforms. So the last decade has really been about rented space. You are renting space on Instagram, you are renting space on Facebook, on LinkedIn, because it's not yours. And at any time, they can shut down your account. They can not push out your post, and people are getting really tired of that on both sides. From the audience perspective, they don't get to hear from the people they really love. From the business owner and creator side, you don't get to connect with your audience. So there's this growing recognition of a need for control and stability in the online space. So you are going to see a big push of people wanting their own platform and content. Now, that doesn't mean you stop using the other tools. It just means that this is in a fundamental thing. It's like buying the store where you sell your products instead of always just renting it or being a pop up. It's actually more similar to the pop up because you really don't have control. So, ways that you can do this is one, make an effort to create evergreen content that lives on your spaces. So, a blog that lives on your space, you might not even update it every week, maybe it's once a month, but that is yours. It's driving traffic to you. It could also be a digital product that you own on your website. It could be your podcast, for example. These are things that you own. This is your content that you decide how it goes out. The next thing to think about here is creating 3 different types of funnels and segmenting your customers in that way and thinking about how can the way that you attract these people in these 3 different ways. So, like right now, think about who are 3 kinds of customers you have that buy from you or you want to sell to. What are 3 products or offers that you can put them in? Those are your 3 funnels and have that live on your website. This is the project for you today. If you don't already have that ready, map that out. 3 kinds of customers, what they need, and 3 types of offers, even if you don't create it today, but that you could do that lives on your website so that you're not just selling again and again launches or one-to-one through Instagram or Facebook. This is a much more targeted and methodical way. Next, when you implement this, you want to think about how can I reduce my reliance on social media? Because yes, it is an amazing discovery tool, but we want to think about how can you change your workflow a little bit, tweak it so that people are driving traffic to your platforms and not just to these third party ones. So, what that might look like is maybe typically you come up with a post, you put it on Instagram, and that's it. It lives there. Maybe people find it, maybe they don't. Instead, what we're thinking about looking at is one, repurposing, taking that social media post, expanding it into a blog, expanding it into a podcast episode, having that piece of content grow into something that you own that is used for more than one little write off thing. The second part of that is always having CTAs, calls to action in your social media posts, which direct back to something you own. I do this all the time with a podcast. Listen to the podcast. Go to my website. Every single post you have should direct to something you own. Every single time. Something else I really recommend is scheduling content recycling. Because if you can take a post, let's say that you did 6 months ago, and you put it out there again, I had a guest talk about this, Deanna. Her episode is great. She's a digital marketing guru. She was saying that she'll have the same thing go out, the same photo, even the same text. 6 months later, and the same people are commenting without realizing they did it the first time. So you don't need to create something new every time. This is a way for you to reduce your dependence in your time on social media so you can invest it more in your business. This is a really good strategy to think about. Owning your platform. Questions for you now. What would your business look like if social media disappeared tomorrow? How would you connect to your audience if you lost access to every single one of those accounts? How would they find you? As an example, for me, if that happens, they can find me through my newsletter, through my website, through my blog, through my podcast. If they search on Google, because I always did the SEO articles and the SEO podcast, they can find me there too. So I'm not worried about that. But you want to think about what would you do? Do you have something in place for that? Number 2, how can you create a direct line of communication with your audience? What steps can you take to really build and nurture them on a platform you own? So that might look like a podcast, a newsletter, a special series, but what can you do where you have a direct line of communication with them? Let's say not even every week, but every month even, to maintain that relationship. And then number 3, this is why I reduced how much time I spent online, because I thought about this question and I built around it. Are you making it easy for your audience to find you and to stay connected outside of social media? So can they do that? Or is Instagram the only place they can really find you? Is Facebook the only place they can message you? Really think about what are your long-term marketing efforts and goals, and how can you create at least one place for them to find you? Number 3, the third trend here should come as no surprise if you know anything about the work that I do, and I really believe in this. Podcasting as a core marketing strategy is only going to continue to grow. You are going beyond traditional marketing when you have a show. You are developing your thought leadership, your authenticity. You are engaging with your audience in a deeper level through this marketing channel. It's not just about selling when you have a podcast, it's about building a relationship and providing consistent value so people trust you. Really good example of how this can add to your business is, let's think of a wellness coach. Let's imagine they start a show called Balanced Living with Emily. Completely making it up. And she talks about holistic nutrition and mindfulness. And she invites experts in her field, so other nutritionists, other wellness coaches, but also related people like yoga instructors or herbalists. And she brings them all on her show. She also shares client success stories. By doing this, she positions herself as a thought leader. She becomes more searchable online, to our point of going beyond social media, and she multiplies her reach organically because every guest that she carefully selects, and this is key, carefully selects, helps her grow even more. Her podcast becomes her primary funnel for attracting clients to her signature programs. This is a really amazing way to grow because of that. Now, if you have a podcast or you're thinking of it, these are the things that you want to implement. Value driven episodes. So, I have a program, it's called Podcast Alchemy. You can sign up if you want, where I really walk you through growing, nurturing, setting up your podcast. If you want to do this, one of the big things I talk about is creating value driven episodes. These are episodes that solve common problems or pain points your audience has. They are often SEO packed with keywords that you have researched, something I show you how to do. There's also guest collaborations, again, choosing the right guest, something else that I am very careful about showing people how to select. This grows. Make sure you get the right industry experts on your show. And number 3, repurpose content. Every time I create a podcast episode, there are at least 4 other ways that I am going to use that content. So when people tell me, like, oh, it's another thing to do to start a show, then you're not thinking about it right, because it's actually saving you time, because you don't spend hours just creating for Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You create for many things. Questions for you related to this. And this is whether you have a show or not yet. What unique perspective could you bring to podcasting to your audience they can't find anywhere else? What could you share on your show that people cannot find from you or maybe from anyone? I've done this long enough to know that everyone has one thing. Next is, what steps can you take to repurpose your podcast content? So if you do have a show, how can you create hours worth of content from one episode? Something that saves you a lot of time. Again, if you really want support and this is one of the trends you want to get on, you're ready for the podcasting, join Podcast Alchemy. It is a program that walks you through every single part of this. There is no other program out there right now that is so involved at the price you're getting it for, that also really focuses on marketing. So check it out if you're thinking, I might want to do a podcast. This is the end of part 1. You have another part already available. Make sure you go and listen, because we go even deeper into these trends. And if you can't listen today, make sure you do it tomorrow. I'll see you in the next one.